one reason why Flossenburg was founded, the concentration camp in Flossenburg. It was the granite quarry. That they wanted to use the stones to make a business with building up new cities for Adolf Hitler, and the train station was not far away, maybe not 2 kilometers on the other side of the village. So nearly all traffic, all prisoners had to go through the village to the other side, to the Flossenburg concentration camp, and the quarry was nearby. So there were plans to enlarge the railway to the camp, but they were not realized. So some came by trucks, of course, too, but the biggest part of the prisoners came by train. It was similar to the other concentration camps. The SS organized a very huge self-administration of the prisoners. So there were some lower rank guards which were in charge of a single block of a barrack, and in the blocks you had the higher levels of prisoners which had a function in the system. There was the camp's eldest, there were the block eldest, the block clerks, and for the work details there were special capos which had the power inside the society of the prisoners. The Flossenburg Memorial Archives has only a few original documents, but we have many copies. We can confirm the names of more than 90% of all the prisoners of Flossenburg concentration camp, which are about 100,000 people in Flossenburg and between 80 and 90 subcamps in Bavaria, Saxonia and Bohemia. And when the US Army liberated the camp, before the SS tried to burn down a lot of the documents they didn't want to let here, but there were so many that they couldn't succeed in burning all the documents, though the Americans found quite huge documentation. The most important of all that, the prisoner register, 8 books, and the closing cards. The US Army took all these documents to Dachau, and they started to make a list out of these documents from the prisoner register and the clothing cards, which were nearly complete, to use that documents for the trials. And after the trials they stored the documents in the US National Archives, and other documents as the closing cards and thousands of transport lists and other documents were stored in the archives of the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen. So after the war, a lot of institutions made copies of these documents, microfilm copies in Israel or in Belgium or in other institutions. And when this institution here, Flossenburg Memorial, was founded after 2000, we made many journeys nearly through the whole world to collect all these copies which are relevant for the documentation of Flossenburg, and we made a quite huge database project which lasted 5 years, and with the help of 50 students we were able to compile a list of all names we know. It was nearly 92,000 names, and we printed a big memorial book which is now visible in the exhibition.
Yeah.
So it's quite good possibilities to make researches on prisoner names. And so this was the biggest challenge. Of course there are other groups which are still missing or missed, and it was complicated to reconstruct, e.g. Soviet POWs or special prisoners who were here only for some days or only for hours, just for execution. For example, the most famous prisoner Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which was not registered like many others. That's the gap between the names we have and the number of 100,000. Well, the Memoriale in Flossenburg is one of the oldest in Germany or even Europe. The site, it was built up in 46 and 47 in a little part outside the former prisoners' camp, the Valley of Death, between crematory and the chapel, which was built up of 3 former watchtowers. But this was only a memorial site without administration and the research department and pedagogical department. And if you ask for when started the memorial, maybe you are thinking about the institution which you know today with the museum and 2 exhibitions and a museum's coffee. This was built up in the year 2000, so quite late. Another very special story about this architectural building of Flossenburg concentration camp, which was created in 1942 as a special camp for Soviet POWs, which already stayed in the camp since 41 in 3 smaller prisoner barracks, but the blocks which were later used as quarantine blocks were 4 bigger blocks, not only for 250 prisoners but for 500 each, so all 4 together for 2,000 additional prisoners. And it lasted so long to build up this POW camp that it was not very long used for the POWs, because they, until this time already, most of them had left the camp or had died. So they had 4 empty big barracks, though the camps had offered these empty barracks for special quarantine transports from Groß-Rosen and from Majdanek. And sorry, not from Groß-Rosen, from Auschwitz and from Majdanek. From each camp 1,000 prisoners in a so-called Sonderquarantäne. That was the first time when these barracks, original POW camp, were used for quarantine purposes. And after these prisoners had left the camp or had died, they used the 2 barracks in the corner, number 22 and number 23, as a barracks for people who absolutely could not work anymore and just were put it into this barrack to die. So they were called the Sterbeblocks, where the Muselmänner were in. And in the other 2, a bit closer to the camp, number 20 and 21, they were situated the quarantine blocks, where many new transport heads to spend between 1 week and 3 weeks time period after arrival until being put it into a block or being put it into a transport to a sub-camp, or maybe being put into a transport to another camp. So it was quite normal that prisoners had a period of around 2 weeks, 1 week more or less, in one of these quarantine blocks before they had another fate.